All right, excellent. Without further ado, may we have the Prime Minister to kick off this debate on the motion that this House would use faith-based rehabilitation in prison.
Okay, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay. Is it fine if I don't on my camera because my Wi-Fi is a bit laggy?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. POI is in chat. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Faith-based rehabilitation is important because it allows criminals to have the motivation to actually turn over a new leaf. We think that this faith instilled into them allows them to actually rationalize the things they have done wrong and only move towards the future of having things like better actions and being compassionate to help them reintegrate back into society. So before I move on to arguments then, let's just deal with a bit of setup. Because what is faith-based rehabilitation? We think it looks like including things such as religion and the process of instilling faith and hope into criminals in the prison system, for example. We think this uses religion as a form of treatment, for example, having things like prayers and stuff like that that criminals would have to do in order to have this faith instilled into them. So how does the current prison system work in status quo? We know that there are actually several problems with this system, in status quo right now. We think that first of all, there's not a lot of facilities that are in these systems. We think that even if they aren't of good quality and they aren't actually something that is able to help criminals rehabilitate or think about their actions of the consequences, right? And then we think that secondly, there's things like counseling that is offered but isn't actually catered to criminals. We think that this is often expensive and not really following the needs of what criminals actually need, and it's all basically an illusion that is showing the society that the criminal justice system is doing something, but it's actually not. We think that it further only hardens criminals when they believe in values that are extremely harmful and do actions that make the system worse. We then on outside the house, you uniquely give them the avenue to have rationalization of their actions and to rethink the consequences of them. So how are we going to be implementing this into the current prison system? We think that first of all, this is going to be integrating religion into the system. We think that it includes things like counseling sessions based on faith, having discussions on religious topics. We think it involves praying and activities for example going to churches in the prison, and it resembles what other people from these religions would actually do. We think that the government will also elect certain charity groups and religious NGOs by having an extensive check to be able to organize these events. So the burden then is about how does faith uniquely help prisoners to be able to genuinely get better and be able to be at a level of mental stability for the next step in their sentence, whether it would be to be released from prison, serving more time, or starting to serve in society, for example. So moving on to arguments then, I'll be giving you two arguments in this speech. The first about how the current prison system often is extremely harsh and how with faith's implementation uniquely aid these prisoners. So there are three layers to this. First layer, what does religion mean to these individuals? We think religion gives a sense of idea that there is a higher deity being that overlooks their entire lives. We think that this is important because it makes individuals who are already in such a low state of their lives feel seen and taken care of. So it leads to things for example, empowerment, or things for example, identification, that these criminals can know that there are other people out there who are looking out for them, and that gives them a sense of warmth and a feeling of belonging in a community that motivates them to do good things in their life, which I'll explain later on. We think that secondly, religion is a lot more beneficial because you have a community of people. Because now you know that there are many other people who are also following these same religions, and in that prison system itself, you have closer proximity to other people who also suffer the same problems as you, who also do bad actions in your life but now are looking to repent. We think that you're able to build bonds better and feel connected in a way where you have this safety net, where you have religion to overlook and take care of you as a whole, so you are more likely going to motivate yourself to do good things in the future. Second layer then, how actions prior to religion were done due to a lack of empathy and understanding, and how faith uniquely instills this into people to lead them to reform. You know, criminals don't really understand the repercussion of their actions because they often commit these crimes due to the lack of feelings, and they're not really afraid of consequences. We think on opposition, you're not going to change that because you're only going to make criminals feel even more hate towards society and only causes them to commit even more crimes in the future. We think what we do on opening government is that you can rationalize these problems. So we think it opens up up experiences and visualize the stuff that you did wrong, because there is a large difference in knowing that you commit these crimes and also like being able to feel like the pain you have caused the victims when you have committed these crimes. You're gonna be able to give that on outside the house because you have these things like, for example, counseling sessions based on religion that make these people rationalize what they did wrong. I think faith instills in them that doing things like good actions or being compassionate gives you like a better life in going to like heaven, for example, right? There's amount of motivation where like even now if your life isn't that great, you can still strive to do good things in the future. We're still able to like change and turn over a new leaf. We think that faith motivates these people to reform and change their perception of society because now they had something to follow, they had something that they can keep up with and had a goal to reach. The third layer then, how faith uniquely helps individuals endure current day problems in the prison system, and I think this uniquely leads to further individual development. So life in the prison is hard, right? Because criminals like are basically like stuck in jail for a long time, meaning that they're going to suffer like regardless on both sides of the house. But what we do on opening government is that we give criminals something to keep going and we prevent them from committing crimes in the future. We think that faith instills that drive into them, that if they were compassionate or do good things, God would reward them, for example, right? And this is more likely going to be like beneficial outside the house because you had closer proximity to it, because you were praying to like God, for example, because you were able to do these things that allow you to have like little changes in like your actions that actually make you have a better life in the future. We need to allow people to integrate back into society even more because you prevent things like future crimes being committed. You had this sort of like deterrence mechanism because you're able to make these criminals like want to do good things, right? We also think about how there's individual development, about how you're able to turn over a new leaf. You're less going to be held back by the past mistakes and consequences of your life. You're going to be a lot more focused about things you can do in the future. It's a lot more better than ops, like criminal justice system, where you're only going to instill hate and suffering into these criminals. Before I move on to my second argument, I'll take a POI from CO.
If it is true that they want to look forward to freedom because prison is hard, then is that not the goal to not do bad?
Yeah, so we're telling these people we're using faith as this rehabilitation to make them not do bad things. And this is a lot more better on outside the house because you had this like reason to like not do these bad things because you were compassionate, because you wanted to follow what God was telling you to do, because you had to be like you had to do good things in order to do good things in life. So you're able to get that sort of like prevent future crimes in the future better on outside the house. So second argument then, how religious values often prevent these individuals from making decisions that would lead them back to jail, which we'll also do with POI, right? We're going to talk about how the first layer, how there's a development of a moral code where these people have to collectively follow it. You know, religion gives these people a sense of like moral code. You're able to follow this code and do things like good actions, and that people that collectively follow it because you're already in such a low point in your life. There's like nothing else for you to like steep that low into, right? The second layer about how faith gives them a sense of purpose in the long term and they pivot to reintroduction higher on our side. We think religion gives them a sense of motivation where you're able to keep going and do good things. And this is beneficial because you want to get reintegrated back into society. So now they have this goal to reach where if you're able to do good actions, you're like God will reward you and you're able to like get reintroduced back to society, for example. Meaning that now then when you get like reintroduced into society, you're better equipped with skills or mindsets that help criminals have less desire to commit crimes and basically have an overall less crime rates on outside the house. The third layer then talks about how we're able to have a community out there who is waiting for these people to like go like be integrated back into society. There's like a community who also follow these religions where they're able to feel like included and have a sense of belonging in a large group. You're able to feel like you're part of something bigger. Really, this is a very like good sense of empowerment that we give to criminals. We're able to know that there are other individuals who help you. There are individuals who can take care of you, which is why you should vote for OG. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for a fine speech. May we have the Leader of Opposition make a case for the opening up.
I just wasn't there.
Leader of Opposition, are you ready?
Yeah, just give me 10. Hi, I am Hridhik, going Gazello. Prefer to pronounce him. I'll take a POI around the 5th minute, preferably closing. Chat works perfectly fine. Yeah. starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. First of all, panel, understand what are the prisons that we're actually tackling. We need to understand that probably on the violent side of the thing that they've committed a crime, caught committing a crime, and that is the main motive that was for them throughout their lives. It was to not get caught initially. However, they've been caught, which actually gives them a very unstable mindset. One, they never know what this person interprets, from where the cruel thoughts creep into this person. You need to understand that when you have unstable thoughts or thoughts from where you can go anywhere, when you teach them thoughts which have a large amount of interpretation, there's a large amount of subjectivity involved with interpretation as well. What then happens is that there are huge amounts of negative interpretations that can still be done from this person in general, which means that when you preach religion, you need to understand religion is never objective in nature. It is always subjective. What happens to a subjective thing is, however good it might be, it always has a scope of it being interpreted in the wrong way. Why is the likelihood of this person interpreting this in the wrong way? Is because I tell you why this person has volatile thoughts. This person is also away from his family, is been living in all livelihood, poor living conditions, and has failed at his main goal in life. When you fail at your main goal in life and you're going through a tough situation, you often have volatile thoughts. When you have volatile thoughts, your thoughts often lead to negative consequences, which then leads me to my point is that when you preach religion to a person who's in jail, the likelihood of that person misinterpreting things is very high. We need to understand there have been also instances in past where criminals often use religion as an excuse for their actions. For example, people saying that this religion uh, is what justifies my act, which means that even if that act wasn't justified by any means by this religion per se, for example, killing a few people or killing people of the other religion, that is what one person interpreted and did. However, even if that is not something that the religion preaches, that is something that this person interpreted in the very first case, which then becomes an excuse for this person committing a crime. You need to understand when you're talking about rehabilitation, what is your main goal? You need to understand we need to make these people become normal citizens, be amongst the population, do what other people do, and not commit a crime again. We need to calm down their thoughts. When you teach religion, there's a huge probability of volatility and negative thoughts existing. When you talk about being a normal citizen, for that you need to do what other people do, which means that you need to have basic skills, basic education. You need to have those extra vocational skills so that you can probably have a job or even sustain a living after you release from jail. Because you need to understand when you're in the jail for a long period of time or even a short period of
Hey,
time, there's a
Bhai.
lot of large amount of I'll take it through chat first before and after the fifth minute. There's a huge amount of there's a huge amount of things that you actually need to do to actually fit in to the public, and that is the main goal of rehabilitation in the very first case. How do you do that? It is by basic education, vocational skills, etc., etc. When you don't teach all of that and just preach religion, there are a huge amount of negative impacts. Even if I take my worst case that there aren't really negative impacts, and even if there are positive impacts, the aim of rehabilitation, that is to make these people able enough to probably fit into the population, fit into the normal population. That goal is not fulfilled when you talk about just preaching religion. Because just by preaching religion, a person does not go ahead and get a job. For getting a fucking job, you need to go ahead and first learn a lot of things. But this person, or like you, does not have a large amount of skill and hence needs to learn all of that. Where do you do that? In the jail. And that is exactly the main goal of rehabilitation. For moreover, you need to understand this is an expensive task. It means that if you ask, let's say, uh, people, probably popes or preachers, to come to jail and probably teach all these people this religion, etc. If they come and tell me that, this is how we'll probably limit misinterpretation of all these laws or of all this religion, etc., etc. What then happens that there's a large amount of money that you're actually investing towards this, which means that you cannot really have an option of also going and probably giving them those skills, probably giving them more education, etc., etc. That is also a costly affair. So you need to understand there are two types of countries that might exist that we explicitly cater to. You need to understand many countries are secular, one. Secondly, many countries preach a particular religion. You need to understand when you're talking about a country which preaches a particular religion, in all likelihood, this person and all people in this jail will be aware of this religion, which means that if I'm talking about, for example, Vatican City, or probably you're in a jail in a country like that, you already have knowledge of a particular religion. You've been preached that throughout your childhood. However, that has not helped, which means that any knowledge of religion that you give them further would not help, because that is something that has also been done priorly. But how does that bring about a new impact? Unknown. What then happens is the other type of countries, which are many countries you need to understand are secular. When you talk about secular countries, there are large amounts of religion that are existing, which means that whatever gov comes, OG comes, And what they do is that, oh, you probably have groups of people, you'll probably have people who find similar people get together just because of similarities of religion. Yes, that is true, but you also need to understand when you talk about secular country, yes, there is groupism, but with groupism there is also divide amongst different groups. It means that when there are people of different religions, there is a large amount of divide occurring amongst the jail, which means that when you're trying to decrease the volatile thoughts and the criminal thoughts of these people just so that you can rehabilitate them, when you talk about further division, that is not something that is good for them, because then it gives them uh, wrong thoughts, or probably thoughts in the wrong direction, because you're probably creating a further message of a divide amongst the people. For that, POICG.
So there's very little room for misinterpretation within religion, given that they tell you directly that you should not steal, you should not harm one another, and that you should not kill. Where is the analysis from your side to prove that they are likely to misinterpret it in the first place?
In my very first characterization I gave you, I told you we talk about prisoners and not a person in general. And let me bring about a light on the fact that there have been many cases, not just one, many cases that the people actually misinterpret, or even if not given the tag of misinterpretation, you need to understand that it is largely subjective, which means that there's not really a right interpretation or a wrong interpretation. There can be large amount of interpretation that different people might have, and you can't just limit preaching religion or faith to just being like, oh, you probably shouldn't steal, you probably just should be a good person, etc. etc. There's a large amount of the depth attached with that, which means that there's not a large amount of limitation that can just be done. Moreover, I was talking about how there's a large amount of divide when you talk about people, which means that yes, there's amount of groupism, but when you talk about secular country, there's a large amount of divide. And when there's a divide among these criminals, there's probably a possibility, a large amount of harmony in these jails explicitly as well, which means that there could be people from, let's say, a Hindu religion or a Christian religion, which can probably go ahead and have divides amongst each other, fight against each other, can also lead to increasing violence in the jail, and not just limited to the jail, but also to my future opinions. Which means that when I'm explicitly taught religion, that, oh, I probably follow this religion, there's also some possibility of me being anti towards the other religion as well, which means to the community of people who belong to the other religion, there's a huge amount of unlikeness that I might have towards those other people, and hence OG's another main case about reintegration to society does not get fit in as well, because then you probably lead to bad thoughts towards other religions. Oh, thanks.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. May we have the Deputy Prime Minister close the opening of case.
Hi, can I be heard just to confirm?
Yep.
All right, just give me a second. Okay, just to confirm if I'm audible, I'll be starting my speech. Also, POI is in the chat. I'll take it around the 5th minute. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Faith was the most empowering form of reform because we uniquely made individuals want to stick to stringent standards of a moral code that represented so much more than just text to them. The way OG wins this round was on the incredible nuance on problems that exist within the current system and about how it hardens these criminals. We're able to give them another chance and be part of something that often makes them pivot to better decisions on our side of the house. 2 observations in my speech before my rebuttals and argument. Firstly, about opposition's infatuation with the current employed mechanisms is what lost them the round. They talked about how they can get training and education. First of all, this never actually dealt with the fact that there's entire inherent bias towards education from prison systems itself, because they recognize the fact that there was extremely exclusionary of them in the first place. It's likely that these people committed crimes because no one wanted to give them the education and no one wanted to spread awareness on the problems that these people are facing. They internalize feelings against against the education system board, and they're often going to recognize the fact that this was so exclusionary in the first place. They don't want to partake in something that was so inherently biased towards themselves. There was feelings gone towards not being able to opt into education and all of these things. But this was an extremely big problem because the current status quo model that's employed within prison systems was incredibly expensive and extremely hard to maintain. Kate highlighted about how the models that they already existed aren't going to be that good because it takes a lot of money. So opposition's entire case is just going to plummet on itself because for the simple reason they drain government resources to a higher extent. But I feel as though this is also exclusionary of countries that don't have the ability to fund education and get training. Because recognize the fact, if you want to develop niche skills, it takes a lot of money and it's way more expensive. On our side of the house, we clearly highlighted about how government checks and balances are going to exist. And after an extensive background check, we outsource it to other outside actors. So we're able to have NGOs and charity organizations related to faith and religion that do this. We're able to have way better capitalization on our side of the house, where we save a lot of money, but we also have religion wanting to do this. And the main difference was these people are going to actually want to opt into religion. For the simple framing, religion has an acceptance and embracement policy in which they want to feel as though they're open so that they can get more followers. The simple fact that this extends towards the prison system and the inmates are obviously going to feel as though they're valued people because they wanted them within the system, that they wanted them to come to church or pray to the mosque or something like that. And they're obviously going to want to go in because there's the first time in their life someone has actually valued them and wanted them to do something with them together. Secondly, about how they were incredibly undermined of what our case stood for. Sure, they gave a few rebuttals, but then you have three things they never responded to and about how they were extremely harmful. Firstly, about pivoting to better decisions. We told you about holding up to a certain moral code helps these individuals want to make better decisions on our side of the house. It means that once you leave the prison system and once you're trying to be reintroduced into society, you're often going to do things that will align with the moral code, where you want to be compassionate, where you don't want to do crime again, because you feel as though all the actions that you did collectively led to the worst of society, which goes against the doctrine of God or goes against certain values that is obviously going to go against your own moral code because it was so heavily influenced by what religion is and how it was implemented into you. They make better decisions. This was in and of itself an independent pathway to victory, because recognize the fact that a lot of these people, when they leave their current prison systems and status quo, often make horrible decisions because they pivot back to crime, or they're just not able to function because of reintroduction being so hard. On our side of the house, we not only have a community waiting for them because people want to accept them because they're also religious and have identities that align, but also for the simple fact that they want to make better decisions because they feel as though they're part of something bigger than themselves. Secondly, about how reintroduction was better on our side of the house. We already explained about how there's community, but we told you about how these people are likely to want to do good things in their life and they're likely going to strive for better things. We give them the motivation because on our side of the house, we instill self-worth, and it was extremely important. They never responded to on their side of the house. It's likely that these people committed crimes in the first place because no one cared. And taking their own analysis about how they likely have been away from their parents and stuff like that, and away from friends and support structures, is likely that it's very important that you need these people to have certain values and about how they're going to be so important in making collectivized action to making good choices. We're going to uniquely win this debate on how we pivot towards better decisions and about how it's empowering for these people. But going on to religions, first of all, this interpretation of religion was extremely less likely to happen because there was just no analysis whatsoever. But also, I feel as though religion often incubates a lot of debate and like a lot of being able to have some sort of discussions about these things, because it's genuinely what fosters discourse within religion, which helps its more persuasive image. So that's why it's not going to be happening. But finally, they talk about how you're not going to you won't be catering towards people who align with other religious policies. I feel as though if they do have a sense of faith, it's obviously that the government would want to have some sort of inclusionary policies, because given their own analysis, if there was infighting within these prisons, it harms the government themselves and there's a way bigger cost to pay. So it's likely that they're going to have better implementation. But onto the argument about how faith creates the best form of self-worth instillment within these individuals and how it's an extremely important form of escapism. First layer about what's the current problem with the prison system and about how individuals change on our side of the house. I think the current prison system was incredibly unnuanced and stagnant. It was the only current model employed. This wasn't an incentive for people to care about prisons in the first place. I think on our side of the house, we uniquely share a spotlight the moment religion comes in place. So people who are drawn to religion are often going to start to care about these people more. We're able to have way more collectivized action about caring for these individuals. But on our side of the house, there's a spiral of feeling that on their side of the house, there's a feeling that no one is there for you. On our side of the house, that means that you're likely to be way higher to commit crimes on their side of the house. But finally, it's just simple steps like going and valorizing a certain deity and praying is what gives individuals intrinsic value. The fact that they're going to keep on changing and having motivation to do these certain activities makes them linked to something way bigger than them. They have unique happiness on our side of the house the moment they're going through their sentence. Because recognize opposition's case was extremely unnuanced for the simple fact they only want to deal with people who are leaving the prison system. But Kate already highlights about how in three stages of different prison times, we're able to uniquely cater to these individuals. But finally, on Our Side of the House, you feel as though you're something bigger, which gives you a sense of purpose. Criminals feel isolated and alone given their own analysis. On Our Side of the House, we have the avenue that comes and opens up to them, in which they want to contribute to religion, in which they want to make positive change. Criminals are perceived that after what they're looked at when they leave. I feel as though on Our Side of the House, we have better image reform because it humanizes them the moment they believe in certain things that are like similar to other people. But finally, we are able to have coping better on Our Side of the House. People have a community. They're able to process how they did wrong things. But finally, on the entire claim that they bring about rationalization being horrible, I feel as the moment religions highlight about how you did something wrong is what helps these individuals. On Our Side of the House, these people rebound to crime rates because they don't have moral standards and because they've been so incredibly abused by by current day prison systems. We uniquely make them pivot to better decisions on Our Side of the House. Propose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Maybe have the DLO to close out the top half debate.
Just starting in 30 seconds.
Sure.
Just confirming if I'm clearly audible.
Yep, you are.
Vansh Aggarwal, DLO, no prefer pronounced. I'll take a POI through the chat, preferably from closing around the 50 minutes. So with that, starting my speech, myself on the 3, 2, panel various sponsors at the top. Firstly, DPM tells you that vocational training and education is bad. They don't actually give you any real analysis as to why is it likely to be bad on a comparative to their model, but their only analysis is to say that, oh, this didn't work in the past. I mean, this is an assertion at best, right? We need to structurally analyze that. Why is this not going to work? But secondly, they also say that this is going to drain so many government resources. Okay, but OG's model is going to take resources as well, right? Any model you implement is going to take resources. Debate is about where are you able to utilize those resources better. They don't actually talk about how resource intensive their side is, but I just want to make it a little more visceral, where they inherently have to invite priests and preachers from different religions, because inherently people have different faiths and biases towards their own communities and their own religions. They can't exclude anyone out of this, which is why their side is going to be extremely resource intensive as well. We posit that instead of doing that, we can use those resources into giving these people vocational training, if not education, then vocational training, which is eventually going to help them in real life. But secondly, why is vocational training good here? We think that it gives them inherent skills required to get a job, right? Because, like, for example, if I get out of prison and I don't really have any vocational and any real skills which can translate to me generating an income for me and my family, I am still going to commit crimes out of necessity, right? And that is one major goal that rehabilitation seeks to give: deterrence, that people should not reduce recidivism, where people should not be in a position to commit crime again. We think that we are the side that uniquely achieves that, because note, even if I have a lot of faith in God, even if I have a community, but at a point at which my basic needs are not fulfilled, according to Maslow's hierarchy, my need to get a stable shelter, my ability to get food and water is what matters the most to me, right? Religion comes at the top, at the point of self-actualization. But at a point at which I can't get my basic needs fulfilled, I'm still likely to commit a crime. They don't stop that. We uniquely stop that by providing these people the skills they actually need to go out there and get a job after their prison ends. But note, they had community since childhood, right? They probably had parents who taught them that stealing is wrong, that murdering people is wrong. They've had codes of morality taught throughout, preached by everyone, that you shouldn't accrue harm onto other people. They've had this since childhood. It's not like they haven't had other people telling them what's right and what's wrong, but they still chose to commit this crime. Why? Because again, people weigh different things differently. And note, OG's case is completely contingent on these people internalizing religious teachings and morality to such a large extent that it outweighs any of their other motives and biases. They never prove that why is this extent likely to be present. I expect CG to do that. But note, I tell you that why is it not likely to be present? Because again, they've had this since childhood, but they weigh things differently. But also note Hridhik's analysis on why these people have such a fucked up mental condition within prison, right? He tells you that these people didn't plan on getting caught, but they did get caught. They lost the trial in court, which is how they ended up in prison, right? They're likely to internalize this as a very big loss for them because they banked their entire hopes that I'm not going to get caught in this. They probably invested in a lawyer or like probably went did a lot of like courtroom trials, hoping that this won't happen, but it did. They're also away from their family, meaning that the mental health is fucked up, which is why large room for misinterpretation exists to answer CGCOI. But note, I'm going to now argue, taking them at their best, that even if room for misinterpretation does not exist, that is still going to be bad. But lastly, just one last response is to we do get communities on our side as well, right? It's not as if religion is the primary source of community a person can have in their life. We think, yeah, my page is to start. I'll chat, I'll take it later. We think that people are able to form communities through other means as well. For example, people I share my bunk with, people I have my lunch with in prison. Or for example, on our side, we give them vocational training. People I train with, right? People I sit and chat with or read a book with. There are many ways to access communities. We don't think religion is the sole way to do that. But I'm now going to talk about why is dividing people based on religion going to be extremely bad, right? Because we think thinks that religion inherently divides people. Why is that the case? Because note, a key feature of all religious teachings is having unwavering faith in God. And this God looks like different things than every other religion, right? For example, Islam teaches some different things about God. Hinduism teaches different things. Christianity teaches different things. This is why religion is uniquely different from spirituality, where you all have like one common goal and you all should follow this one spiritual goal. But religion is inherently different for each and every person. We think people have and secondly, we think people have pre-existing faiths and biases. It's not as if these people never had heard of religion when they were outside of prison and when they were living a normal life, right? They had heard of it. They probably did go to temple or they probably did go to church with their family or with their friends, right? These people have biases towards one religion, which is why we think necessarily people from same religion on their side are going to necessarily group together. But note, even within one religion, there are many intersectionalities, right? For example, within Hinduism, there's the caste system, which also further divides people. There are many different subsectional beliefs within Hinduism as well. And every religion has that, right? They think this is going to divide people in many different smaller communities where people from same religion are attending the same talks together. They're having these meetings. They're going to they're going to the religious leader to get these teachings. I'm going to impact that. Why is this bad? But for that, I'll take CG.
So the existing divide in status quo is that they are divided by their gang affiliations, their race, and also their religion. At the very least, on our side, they're only divided by religion. If anything, it is a uniting factor. Why is this alternative so much worse than being affiliated by gangs?
I mean, you worsen the religion division. That does not mean that you take away gang violence and racism that already exists, right? I don't think that you are going to achieve that on your side. What you do is that you add incremental harm onto the already existing divide within prison, right? I'm going to talk about why is that incremental harm bad. Firstly, it worsens otherization towards other communities, where, like, for example, if one community is in religious minority, that community is going to be in constant target of microaggressions from these other people from other communities, from majority communities within those prisons, right? But secondly, this worsens communal violence, where people from different communities are trying to always outcompete each other because necessarily they're going to have more faith in their God. They're likely to otherize these other people, which increases communal violence. But thirdly, this fucks up the entire impact that these people wanted to achieve. Deterrence, right? Why? Because you either kill people because you have worsened communal violence, but or rather you fuck up their mental health and their anxiety, where they think they have to be on their toes all the time in order to not get killed. But also you don't give any vocational training. So after they come out of religion, there's just a person who preaches teachings of Jesus, but they can't get a job there. I don't think they can exist that way. With that, extremely proud to oppose vote for vote.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Maybe now have the member of God kick off the back half debate. Case for
Hi, audible.
Yep, you're audible.
Great. Am I visible as well?
Yep.
Great. POI through voice, exclusively through voice. I don't check chat, and I am prone to ignore you if I can't hear you say POI. You don't have to badge it though, because I'm pretty sure I can hear you. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A lot of these individuals who are prisoners are often robbed of their sense of political or social efficacy because the way that they are treated by the carceral state are that they are custodial citizens who should be permanently disenfranchised, barred from being able to access any of their political or economic rights. And a lot of these prisoners, I want you to know, are not prisoners who have committed violent offenses, like if they are rapists or if they are like, have like majorly engaged in things like prostitution rings. All of these individuals are from underprivileged and underserved communities who had no other access to communities that would have made them better individuals in society. They could not access things like education. They could not access things like churches because a lot of their friends or families were already born into a life of crime, so it made no sense for them to be able to have alternatives in status quo. That is why religious communities and faith-based rehabilitations are so important. Two rebuttals first before let's spear out opposition, opening opposition. Because the first thing they said is that religious messaging is difficult to it's easy to misinterpret, and there's like a lot of religious divide that will happen as like a result of this. The first thing I want you to note is presumably that big churches like Elevation Church or Hillsong Church that is headed by people like Joel Osteen will obviously campaign to its members for its initiatives. So that is why they're able to do these initiatives in the first place, because their church members have to support it and have to give financial assistance or financial donations for the church to be able to do this. So divide is obviously not an issue in this debate. But the second thing I want you to note is it's difficult to interpret because a lot of these religious leaders who go into prisons with a certain type of messaging and a certain type of branding obviously means that these people are lucky to be authoritative and therefore control what kind of messaging will exist in status quo. And because it is severely unlikely for the church to go into prisons and say that you deserve to be a prisoner because you're poor, because you're black, because you are some part of ethnic or racial minority, it's just unlikely to happen given the whole message of the church is love, forgiveness, or repentance, or sublimating yourself into God. Which means that a lot of these problems that opposition poses are not necessarily harmful or are just mitigated at best. But the second thing they tried to do is that they tried to prove that prisoners are better served with vocational training. I want you to know that this is not contested by closing government. Opposition never proved why these things are exclusive in the first place, which means that it is equally plausible for us to posit that these workshops or these kinds of jobs will exist on our side of the house. I will prove that in my argument. So even in their best case where they get these jobs, it is unclear to me why that is exclusive or why that is likely to be more funded given the fact that the prisoners of state prisons are often outsourcing their kind of work and their kind of labor and their kind of protection to private prisons like LaSalle and things like that. First argument therefore is why we can't protect prisoners outside of these mechanisms. Number one, a lot of politicians don't want to protect prisoners, and I want you to know this is an exclusive mechanism that comes from closing government. The first thing I want you to note is that law and order is an electoral tactic, and a lot of prisoners are often disempowered by the kinds of narratives we spread about things like crime control or things like state surveillance. I want you to note that even if Kamala Harris and Lyndon B. Johnson are like Asian Americans or African Americans, they campaign heavily on things like crime control, things like incarceration for like non-violent offenses, for like if you smoke marijuana or if you were possessing marijuana, they consider that as illegal, like allowed you to be detention in the jail. Like even if they were black, they didn't want to campaign against these sorts of issues, even if they knew that was most proximate to the community, because things like crime control are so like amenable to a lot of individuals in society who want to support this. I want you to know that even Rodrigo Duterte or in places like El Salvador, things like extrajudicial killings and kidnappings of these kinds of individuals was just supported by the public because a lot of these individuals campaign on things like crime control. Secondly, private organizations don't want to invest in this type of rehabilitation either. I want you to know that a lot of charities rely on private investment to be able to run their sorts of charitable campaigns or donations. That is why they focus on a lot of things like food stamps or things like education, because those things are the least politically divisive issues, unlike things like prison or unlike things like rehabilitation or non-recidivism. The only defendants that prisoners have right now are pro bono legal groups, and I want you to know that it's difficult for them to be able to campaign given the influx of a lot of these like cases that exist in status quo. But thirdly, I think regular individuals just support the carceral state no matter what, even if they are sympathetic to black people being constantly the highest rate of people who are in jail for non-violent offenses. They still support things like crime control and state surveillance because that is the dominant predominant political narrative that exists in status quo. What does that mean? It means that individuals have no options on opposition side of the house because there's a state mechanism that prevents them from being able to access this. There are restrictions on public assistance and welfare even when you get out of jail. Most prisoners are permanently disenfranchised. They can't serve in a jury. They can't hold public office when they leave prisons. They're more likely to be marked with their political appearance, which means that they're unlikely to be able to work in viable economic opportunities on opposition side of the house. I'll take the POI. Go, please.
You tell me that these people who probably in jail are less privileged, etc. What do you think is more like that they couldn't go to jail and hence are in jail, or couldn't get basic education and hence are in jail? What is more likely?
Okay, so I'll talk about why it's more likely. In when I prove why we're more opening, we're better than our opening. We're better than our opening because opening government just talks about transplanting the reward punishment system from prison to religion. I think this is completely not the case because a lot of churches are compassionate. A lot of their messages are about forgiveness, about penance, about things like rebirth or the repentance of your past sins, or being able to sublimate yourself into God. That kind of religious messaging that OG neglects to mention is central and the prerequisite to the acceptance that exists within religious communities in the first place. Secondly, there's just stronger religious supervision in prisons now that we're allowing faith-based rehabilitation because the alternative is that states outsource this to private prisons for protection, and the alternatives that prisoners have in status quo in these kinds of prisons are likely to be prison gangs that traffic things like drugs and other contraband. There's just no community beyond their prison gangs, and there's no community outside of them because that community that they have to return to outside of that is likely to be just another life of crime. But the third thing I want you to note, at least these communities are not just amorphous symbols of hope. There are a lot of opportunities that churches give to their members. A lot of churches have opportunities for work for its members. There are things like manual labor work, like setting up the podiums and things like that, or being able to be a driver to a lot of these church religious leaders. They have Bible schools that are given at a discounted rate for the members who are constantly go to church. But churches also have so much fellowship. Church members have gatherings for hobbies. Church members gather to play basketball outside of church. They have ladies and men's fellowship nights to be able to communicate with one another and build more rapport with one another. So even if they are pressured, and this is the case that will likely be pushed, this is the most preferable form of pressure as opposed to the pressure that exists in prison gangs to traffic drugs or their life of crime that they have to return to outside the church. We proved why, number one, there's just no alternatives that exist in status quo even when they get out of jail for good behavior. But two, why religious communities are uniquely capable of providing this sort of better life. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. May we have the member of present a case for CO.
Hi, I'll just get my voice recorder. Give me a quick moment.
Sure.
All right. Hi. POIs through chat. I have the chat open. Okay. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. In any religious-based conversion, the way it works is it brings you to your knees, and when you feel that you have nothing left in the world but God as the lifeline, it is only then that you're able to cling on to these things, and that's why it makes it so harmful and creates massive guilt for you. We think this is only amplified in the systems of prisons. What exactly happened at opening and to some extent member of government? The biggest problem coming from all of these teams is that they fail to discuss why this is something that is so clearly in the state interest. It is unclear. This is especially clearest in the opening discussion, where it's just general discussion of what this particular faith-based rehabilitations can do, but not why it's important to the state. But here's where also we importantly call out them, because we posit that you're able to get religion on both sides of the debate. You have things like community, the idea of community, a moral code, a fear of God that can exist outside of prisons. So it is incredibly unclear why these things existing within the prison system is the tipping point for change for these prisoners, when on the outside that they already have these existing structures that obviously it wasn't able to prevent them from doing these crimes. And why is it in prison specifically? But even if that is the case, And here's where we include closing government in discussion. Why is the state empowered to make that personal, momentous decision for you? Because in status quo, in the way that we conceive of religion in the state, it is something that the state does not interfere. You are free to choose your religion, whether or not you want to be a Muslim, or whether or not you want to be a Christian. The state does not punish you for making any of these choices. We argue that you constrain these civil liberties far more on closing government, on government bench. And for that reason, I think even on the state discussion, they clearly fail. What are we going to do here as closing opposition? We're going to give you a step-by-step discussion of conversion of faith-based rehab in prison that opening opposition did not do. And more importantly, we're going to discuss why it's so important for the state interest. The first thing that we're going to discuss is why it kills the rehab mechanism. So we understand it's already been discussed why exactly people commit crimes. Things like one, out of necessity, out of poverty, and lack of employment opportunities, structural reasons. But secondly, things like psychological trauma. But the second piece of framing here is what exactly does faith-based rehab look like? And here's where we're going to take you step by step, exclusively coming from CO. First, it operates on shame. Priests, wardens, guards tell you that you ought to go to hell, that you are a sinner for the crimes that you have committed. This is the reason for this, is that they want to create an urgency for the individual to opt into faith. Because this is when they feel so shameful, or that they feel like they have nothing else, that they're more likely to opt into God. And this looks like when a priest visits you in prison as a prisoner, they scare you that reading the Bible is the only way out of eternal damnation. Or a prison warden will beat you up if you do not actively or pray excessively throughout the day. This is what it looks like on government bench. But the second step is that it is when you are so broken and that when you have no alternatives left. It is that when the prison system brings to you the concept of faith, where you can only cling on God as a lifeline for your salvation. The third step then is that they tell you that you cannot stray from God because you will be further punished, not just in the present life that you live in the prison system, but also in the afterlife, because God is so omnipotent, is so omnipresent, because the notion of the afterlife is uncertain. We do not know what happens after death. It creates for us a massive fear of not just the present, but also just of the future of the life that we will have when we die. And this note that these mechanisms are not probabilistic. It exists in status quo. Things like conversion therapy, where they guilt gays and that they're going to hell for being gay, or in couples religions therapy. All of these things exist in status quo that exist on these types of mechanisms. We prove to you that this is also likely going to exist on government bench. Before I go into the impacts, I'll take a POI from CG. Yeah.
Tara, what incentive does the church have to bully prisoners who already are disenfranchised? Why can't they just bully individuals who are not out of church if that's the case?
I think the church bullies individuals. Any religion bullies individuals, whether or not they are in prison or they are out of prison. It is why exactly the church or narratives, lots of priests tell you that it is a sin to be gay, or that it's a sin to commit a particular crime. They want you to make you feel shame, remorse. They want you to go to confession. All of these things exist on either side of the debate. It will just be worse when you are in prison. The impacts of this argument is to say is three crucial things. One, it creates massive guilt and self-destruction without addressing the key measures of the crime, as what OO correctly points out. But it's not just that, right? Or the ability of an unstable mental state, but also the idea of resentment. Because when you introduce these kinds of aspects, it is more likely to get greater extents of prisoners thinking about why exactly didn't God help me in my moment of need when I was outside of prison. And you're more likely to feel resentment towards religion or God or the state. And it is in this hopelessness that you feel as if nothing can save you. So things like, it is more likely to get things like recidivism. So this means that government fails on their own metric because of this mental instability, this feeling of hopelessness and resentment. But the third thing is you also create a perverse incentive for the state to make guilt even greater. And here's where we crucially flip government. Because the more that government tries to push that this is going to be effective, the more the state is going to want to implement this across larger extents. So this means that the harm of shame, of mental destruction, is going to be far greater the more that government tries to hinge on its effectivity. Why is this much better than OO? Because we will give to you the missing steps and mechanisms why the rehabilitation based on what it does look like, and it's not just discussing a blanket policy of why mental health or the idea of minorities. But the second general constructive that we want to talk about is about state interest, right? And the counterfactual. Because what is the counterfactual in government on CO? So we think it's secular rehab, psychology, cognitive, and group therapy. We think that we have fiat to improve these things in the first place in status quo. And the existing trend in the landscape for mental health has never been better, is able to support the improvement of these things. So this means that conversely, with this counterfactual on government, so even if the state faith-based religion is good, and here's where we take government at their best case, they create a crucial opportunity cost, because they don't just create the harms that we mentioned earlier, because all the investments into getting priests into prisons across the country, or being able to find out like what the particular religions of individual prisoners, all of this investment takes away from investing into things like psychology, psychotherapy, as actually scientific based measures to be able to address why people commit crimes in the first place. Why are we round winning crucially at CO? First, in terms of mental health, we prove to you why the state cares, because it affects prisoners en masse. And it's not just because of the massive guilt and resentment that creates, but also because it increases it to a great extent. But also prove how you worsen recidivism compared to government. But lastly, we finally prove to you why this is the state interest. Clearly, CO wins this round.
Thank the speaker for a fine speech. May we now have Gobweb close the case for CG.
Hi, I'm just gonna get water. Give me 5 seconds.
Sure.
All right, POIs through voice, just raise it once. If I turn you down, I'll probably ask for it later on. So yeah. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Insofar as we've proven to you that the biggest thing that people need, especially with regards to rehabilitation, is a second chance at life, a second chance at society, we think that San already wins this debate insofar as she has effectively proven to you that religion and the community of religion effectively changes the structures that necessarily push you into a life of crime in the first place. And this is the most important thing in this debate, because it proves to you as to why structures are the most important things that we need to change. This is round winning over OG, particularly because OG relies on morals or something higher, which is something that's intangible in the first place and doesn't necessarily tackle the root cause of crime in the first place. So on the comparative, we're already tackling the root cause that leads them into a life of crime in the first place, but also secondarily, we take away the incentives to recede and to commit crime again, insofar as we are giving them a second chance at life when you give them a community that is outside of crime, outside of gang violence, outside of selling drugs, and most importantly, outside of the communities that push them into doing crime in the first place, but also secondarily, give them a chance at getting a job in the first place through these religious communities. To this extent, we prove to you as to why, one, they're more likely to not recede, but also secondarily, why they're more likely to turn over another leaf and just live a generally better life. Let's deal with this ludicrous case coming from CO and this weird framing that, note, they never really prove, they just assert it. Coming from Terra, what do they prove to you? They argue that, oh, religion will shame you, they're gonna make you feel so bad, they're gonna tell you that you're gonna go to hell, and that religion is your only resort and your only way out. Look, this is such a weird framing of religion in the first place, because note that in the vast majority of cases, religion is 1, compassionate, 2, forgiving. If anything, the focus is on the messaging is focused on the repentance of sin and penance, which means that the messaging that they're likely to give off to people is that, hey, if you do these things, if you pray to God, if you repent, if you confess, if you do penance, you're gonna be forgiven by God. The messaging isn't as negative as how CO pushes to you. This is just extremely unlikely in the first place, insofar as religion is all about giving people hope and bringing people together and giving people the idea that they can repent and that God will forgive them. It's unlikely for them to push the messaging that you will never be forgiven. This is just extremely unlikely in the first place and operates on the absolute worst case. I don't think they can bring us back from the rip because they haven't proven it at member. We gave them a chance to prove it at member with the POI. The most they say is that, yes, they will shame you. Look at conversion therapy. This is just the worst possible definition or the worst possible framing of it. I don't think this is likely. Secondarily, then, in terms of the messaging, it is so unlikely for it to be negative, especially when there are people and multiple people constantly looking over you and having overwatch over you, which means to say that if we are going to reasonably implement this, and they say that they have FIOP to implement mental health or whatever that is on their side, then maybe to some degree on our side, we could have overwatch over this to ensure that it is not implemented in a negative manner, insofar as the state is incentivized to care about the rehabilitation of these people. So it is untrue and at best unlikely for their definition or for their whole harm to fly on their side, insofar it is unlikely within the sphere of religion or within the sphere of religious communities. There is very little religious communities that will tell you will go to hell because you are a prisoner. If anything, if we want a faith-based vocation or faith-based community to exist in prison, it's likely to be operated in a good manner and not going to be bad in the first place then. Secondarily, let's deal with this entire case coming from opposition bench, which tells you that you can focus on the existing mechanisms, which is either basic education, or maybe some mental health help. What does SAN prove to you? One, SAN effectively proves to you why there is very little incentive within the politicians, within the actors in the state to even fund these things. If anything, their whole messaging is focused on putting more people into prison and keeping them there as opposed to getting them out. When you look at Kamala Harris, when you look at Lyndon B. Johnson, which means to say that even if it is true that maybe to some degree they can increase rehabilitation on their side, the incentive to fund these things do not exist because it is widely unpopular in society, and if anything, they are extremely ineffective. What this proves to you then is that even if it is true that to some degree, if implemented to its fullest degree, basic education could be better and mental health could be better, it is unlikely to happen because these things are severely underfunded. The implications of this are simple. Even if it is true that their things are better, the problem is it's not funded well. So the execution of it won't be good at all. If anything, this is where you're likely to be worse off because you're getting very little in terms of returns versus the comparative on our side, where faith-based communities are likely to be sponsored by the church, sponsored by the religious communities, which means that the burden isn't on the state to fund these things in the first place, but rather the burden is on the religious communities, which means that on the comparative, these religious communities give so much more versus than their side. But also more importantly, the most important thing to note here is that these basic things that they want to offer to you from their side will never be funded because the state is too busy funding the prisons as a whole, funding the food that they serve, funding the guards that they necessarily funding the guards that protect these places, funding the janitors who clean up these places in the first place, which means that there's very little pool of funding to even allocate it to rehabilitation in the first place. Closing opposition says they have FIOP, but no, you still have to prove where you're going to get this funding from. There's no FIOP for this. The most we're saying is that we're going to implement this, and the way in which we're implementing this is by having external actors come into the prison and do these things in the first place. So on the comparative, the implementation and effectivity is so much better on our side because you have a greater level of resources when we have external actors doing it, versus on your side, you have very little money and very little funding to even make sure this is effective. Let's deal then with opposition. The things that they push is that first there's misinterpretation. One, they don't prove why this is likely to be misconstrued this is going to be misconstrued to do crime in the first place. How exactly are you going to misconstrue "you shall not kill" to "oh, maybe I should kill"? They don't prove the analysis here. The most they do is that they give examples. People have used religion in the past to commit crime. Why are they going to do this now? Secondarily, the things that they prove is that it's going to cause divide. One, they didn't prove why faith-based rehabilitation is the tipping point for a greater level of divide in the first place. If anything, they say that it's going to get worse. So to this degree, I'm uncertain as to why exactly it's going to get worse. But secondarily, we argue to us this is why this is likely to be better because now they're bonded by religion as opposed to being bonded by their gang affiliations, which is likely to result in violence. What's your POI?
A lot of non-profit organizations and NGOs still exist to give rehabilitation to prisoners. Why can't we get external funding on our side as well?
Well, you should have proven that during your speech. We prove it exclusively during our speech. I don't think that can be credited anymore. But also, even on the comparative, these nonprofits are severely underfunded versus the church, which have so much more funding. So these nonprofits that exist on your side already spread the resources thin with everyone. And they're unlikely to opt into prisons because prisons are just seen as some things that are bad in society versus religions, which are likely to take in everyone. So on the comparative, religions are more funded in general. So even if you have your nonprofits, our nonprofits are better on the comparative. The last thing that they argue to you is that resources are going to be used on either side. The difference is that faith-based communities is sponsored by religious communities. Lastly, then, on the skills to get jobs, know that even if it is true on their side that they may get jobs because of the skills that they learn within the prison, they will never be hired because of this smear on you that says you are a prisoner or that you have a criminal record. Versus on our side, when you have a community that's likely to take you in and give you these very jobs in the first place, which means that on the comparative, we get jobs better on our side. Why are we then better than OG? The biggest reason as to why we win over OG is that we don't rely on morals. We don't rely on the goodwill of people. We change these structures that push them into doing crime in the first place, which means that we take them away from their gangs and we put them into a religious community that inspires them to do good rather than do bad. For these reasons, propose.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. May we now have the op-whip close this debate.
Hello, am I visible and audible?
Yes to both.
Okay. Okay, great. POIs through voice. I'll take you at the 5th minute, again through voice, preferably from opening. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I just want to deal with this call out about why our frame is not successful or not appropriate for this debate. Because a lot of the discussions about our frame is contingent or is a prerequisite for why exactly you get Gov's impacts and mechanisms. Because if they want to run that, oh, religious rehab is good, you have to first explain why exactly this is going to be successful in the first place. And if they are right, that the greatest reason why you want to be able to opt into religion or why you want to become a better person is because you are desperate, is because you have no other lifeline. At what point are you able to feel that desperation? When you are fully loved or when it is at the point in which you have been shamed, when you are literally at the rock bottom? I think that is exactly why our mechanism flies. Because existing faith-based rehabilitation, which by the way, Tara already told you, it's not just conversion therapy. It's even things like couples therapy, where they make you feel ashamed of the actions that you did. And that's what it compels you, that because you hurt the person, because you hurt yourself, and because you hurt the relationship with others, that therefore means that you ought to feel guilty, that you ought to cling onto God more in order for you to be able to do the good. Note that this is the exact same mechanisms that both OG and CG posit in terms of trying to foster things like compassion and community, because you are forced to empathize or quote unquote be compassionate merely because you are shamed for everything that you've done. But secondly, on this discussion about fiat, look, our counter prop was literally status quo. Tara's discussion about the opportunity cost was to tell you about how the same resources that you used to allocate on Gov's side towards faith-based allocation in a faith-based rehab is just merely allocated to just funding or improving the existing mechanisms that exist in status quo. But secondly, it is a this house would motion, meaning you have to operate on the discussion of the state. So if Mezen comes here and say, like, what resources are you talking about? Literally, it's your job to talk about the policy. It's your job to talk about the state interest. And the fact that none of the Gov teams even discuss that is quite shameful. That said, how am I going to enter and destroy everyone in this round? Let's first start with OG. Because OG's win condition is to say that, oh, faith-based rehab is a tipping point for reformation. The pitfall towards this, it assumes, and this is a shared discussion coming from OG and CG, is that it assumes that religion is a silver bullet to making you a better person. I think this is the one thing that I have to question, right? Why exactly do Muslims in India get oppressed by the Hindu majority? Why did the Jews get persecuted by the Christian Nazi Germany? Historically, religions have propelled and justified violence and conflict towards minorities. It is the same application here. It is not clear why that is ultimately the tipping point. But secondly, I think even with modern conversion therapy or even modern couple therapy that is which is faith-based rehabilitation in nature, is in and of itself a justification to discuss why exactly it's fine for an individual to succumb to such sins of like cheating on your partner and the like, or to succumb to such things like homosexuality, and that's why you can still redeem yourself in terms of opting into God. This is exactly why you ought to not believe that religion is a silver bullet, because religion is not all that compassionate. The fact that we have so many minorities in the world that are still oppressed implicates that you cannot just propagate things like compassion, but rather a lot of the discussions can operate on the pretense of compassion, but really just justify a harm. But thirdly then, and this is where I engage on CG. I'll take you later, okay? On CG, where they talked about how, oh, we are essentially depriving them of their communities and other alternatives and their rights. I think you have to understand that in status quo, like even without faith-based rehabilitation, we don't bar people, especially like prisoners, to from opting into religion. If they want to pray for salvation, we still allow them in status quo. We still allow them to do so in prisons, regardless of faith-based rehabilitation in and of in the first place. This means it's not mutually exclusive for you to believe that you have another lifeline like God. The difference becomes whether or not it is the state that pushes you to opt into God in and of itself, destroying your ability to even have that personal momentous decision in terms of opting into religion in the first place. I think this ultimately means that this is counterintuitive to a lot of this CG's claim or battle cry about what rights you access, insofar as the state overrides your right to religious rights and expressions, given that they're trying to push you a religion that you may or may not want up to. If it is true that you are so desperate because that's the reason why you opted into doing a crime, because you felt so hopeless, then at that point are you even able to accept religion in the first place? But fourthly, on this shared case about, oh, this is where you get community. If religion was a tipping point to accept people regardless of their crimes, then why are people who get out of prison still turned away? Not that a lot of the stigmatization does not exist in the vacuum of whether or not you believe in God and the like. I think it looks like stigma, like you thinking as a parent that this criminal or this past criminal is a bad influence to your kids. It's at the propensity of stealing from your kids or harming your kids. It does not exist in a vacuum. But secondly, now we have like sing kumbaya and revolt and essentially triumph over racism. But regardless, no, it is not. Religion is still being used as a day to divide more people. It is not clear why that's a tipping point for more community and more peace. I think it's ultimately harder to overcome a lot of the stigma, which Mezen himself builds up in his whip speech, by the way. A lot of the things I therefore discussed fits a lot of their analysis. Before I continue, OG, any POI? 3,
Yeah,
2,
I'll take it.
1,
The comparative
CG.
on our side was that discrimination will always be on your side, because even if you're educated, people will still exclude you. We at least humanize them with religion so people can identify the fact that they want to turn their life. We have reintroduction on our side.
Look, if religion is the humanization where you do not necessarily isolate them, then why do white Christians still isolate Muslim minorities? Why do white Christians still isolate a lot of black POCs who opt into Christianity? It's because there are other layers of stigma that makes it difficult for them to even accept them into their community, which means religion is not a tipping point. But secondly, how then do we deal with OO? Because OO's win condition is to say that faith-based rehabilitation is bad because it's open to misinterpretation and justify harms. But this is contingent a lot on the gov's worst case, because this is where we're going to weigh. Even on government's best case, where faith-based rehab is good, one, I think this hinges on too many assumptions to prove that this is true. But secondly, I think there are brilliantly tells you about how this robs you of the opportunity cost in terms of like what exactly whether or not the state is the most viable actor in terms of overriding their rights in terms of religious expression. But secondly, I think a lot of the benefits takes too long to manifest and is actually quite bad in the long run, insofar as you already fuck over your own mental stability because of that shame-based mechanism. But even if it wasn't a shame-based mechanism and it's compassion as a mechanism that they want to posit, then it's not clear why that's a tipping point for people to actually be good. Thanks.
Thanks, Speaker, for that speech. That also effectively ends this particular debate. Could a member of the ARCOMS stop the recording?